All right, hello. I want to thank everybody for joining our community meeting to prepare our contribution as a movement, as the People's Budget Movement, to the Seattle City Council budget meeting today. My name is Adam Zimkowski. I work as a community organizer with Councilmember Kshama Sawant. We're going to hear from Kshama very shortly, provide some political context, some contextualization for this People's Budget Movement. As people likely are aware, this is an extraordinary budget session out of the COVID-19 pandemic. We've seen the Mayor Murray propose a budget which is a vicious austerity budget for working people. And of course, we want to fight against that and building a movement to do that. We've also, of course, seen this People's Budget come in the context of the incredible uprising around the Justice for George Floyd protests, and we've seen the incredible demand for this to defund the Seattle Police Department by at least 50%. So we're of course going to talk about that today, and we've also got an exciting lineup, of course, of defund activists. We've got Teal Sean Turner, and we've also got Tati, who've been active from the Everyday March movement, who are going to talk today. We've got Sean Smith from Nicholsville, who's going to speak as a representative of the homeless population, fighting to stop the sweeps and also to fund tiny house villages. And we're lucky enough to hear from Violet Lavatai from the Tenants Union, talk about the need to fund renters' rights organization, and Caitlin Hanen from the Housing Justice Project to talk about the need to fund and fight against evictions, which we know are going to be ensuing en masse shortly if working people, if renters, if communities of color don't get organized to fight back. As we always do, let's go ahead and hopefully a lot of people have already at noon signed up for public comment. This is a community meeting to prepare to give public testimony to the city council. But given that we might have new people watching and that a lot of people don't exactly know how to sign up for public comment, let's go ahead and hear first for a minute or two from Nick Jones, a community organizer in our office, in Kshama Sawant's office, to show people, if they haven't already, how to sign up for public comment. So Nick, if you could take that, that's great.
Thanks, Adam. Just one moment here. All right. So folks should be able to see my screen. No, my name's Nick. I'm a community organizer in Councilmember Swan's office. And like Adam said, it's absolutely vital that, as many people as possible can sign up for public comment to put maximum pressure on the council. You're going to want to find this webpage to be able to sign up. It should be pretty easy to find. You should just go to whatever browser you're using search bar and just type in Seattle public comments. It should bring you, this should be the top search result when it loads. Yeah, the seattle.gov website or .gov website. Just click on that and it will take you to that web page where there'll be some information at the top, but you'll want to just scroll all the way to the bottom. You'll find this form and you'll just want to fill this form out in its entirety. Really crucially, making sure you use your normal email address and phone number. The email address you enter, they'll send you an email with information about calling into the city council's meeting to give your testimony, and they will identify you by the phone number that you entered here. So definitely enter those accurately, and then at the end, just fill out the rest, which should be pretty straightforward. For this part of the agenda you're addressing, type anything. Type People's Budget, or defund the SPD, whatever you want to speak on, and then just hit submit, and you should get an email. So I'll leave it there, and I'll put it back over to Adam. Thanks.
All right, thank you so much, Nick. We're going to hear from Councilmember Kshama Sawant in a minute here. I just want to remind people also that this People's Budget is it's a movement that's going to last over the next couple of weeks. Basically, we've got the budget committee meeting today, which we're preparing to intervene in. I also just want people to put on their calendars, and we'll be talking about this over the course of the next hour. On July 28th, that's next Tuesday at 6 p.m. at Seattle Central, we're going to have a rally in support of the People's Budget Movement's demands. So mark your calendar for that. And then the following day, Wednesday, July 29th, will be another budget committee wherein we'll want to provide even more pressure on the city council. So let's note those calendar items down. And without further ado, let's hear from Shama Sawant to talk about the political context of this People's Budget Movement and also some of our demands and how we're going to fight and win them.
Hi, everyone. Good afternoon. Thank you for joining us here. I know many of us might have campaigned for months for the Amazon tax, and maybe even before that, those of you who were with us in our historic re-election campaign where we defeated Amazon in the Chamber of Commerce must be exhausted, but we have to keep fighting. And at least for the next 2.5 weeks, we have to be quite alert, because unlike other years when only in the autumn season, when the city council discusses and then votes on a budget for the subsequent year, this year, because we are facing the massive recession and the cratering of public revenues because of massive joblessness, because taxes are mostly collected from ordinary people, working people. When we lose our jobs, not only our standards of living suffer, the public revenues, public resources also suffers, because there has been such a historic reluctance to tax big business and the wealthy in order to make sure that our social services and our public services are fully funded, recession or not. And in fact, what we've seen is a chronic underfunding of our services, but even further attacks through just relentless budget cuts that we're going to see in the next period. In fact, right now, the city budget in the coming months and years is going to face at least a $300 million shortfall. And at the state legislature, they have already announced a public budget shortfall of more than $4 billion for the next 2 years. For they counted by a biennium, so 2 years. So we are looking at dire circumstances for funding for our infrastructure, for our schools, for affordable housing, even for food security. So lots of marginalized people and ordinary people who are already suffering, who are going to be put in more misery because of these budget cuts, and we have to fight against them. And this year, as I said, unusually, the city council is also going to be discussing the summer budget. And this summer budget, and that's why we're calling this the People's Budget Summer 2020 campaign, because in the next few weeks, the only decisions that the city council will make will be about the budget for the remainder of this year. So it won't be about the budget for next year. And the budget for next year, as I said, will be discussed in the autumn budget season. And so we will have a little bit of a break before that happens. But this fight is also extremely important, because there are a lot of things for us, ordinary people, marginalized people, communities of color, that are on the line. And we have just won the Amazon tax by building a fighting movement and through an incredible multiracial solidarity that we know exists in the working class, but we need to bring that out. And that's what came out in this Amazon tax struggle, because the backbone of this struggle was the ballot initiative with our 30,000 signatures, which posed a real threat to big business and to the political establishment, who were absolutely unwilling to pass any kind of Amazon tax, but were forced to concede because the ballot initiative presented a real threat. And how does that connect to the Black Lives Matter movement? Obviously, it connects because the Amazon tax is real dollars for our community. And I'll talk about that in a second. But even winning the Amazon tax required us to build a viable ballot initiative campaign. And that came from the fact that thousands of people in the Black Lives Matter movement, when they came out to protest against George Floyd's murder and all the other police violence, they signed our petitions in a really excited manner, because we understand as working people, whether we are people of color or not, we understand that police violence is a result of a police state of capitalism itself. And it is that same system that also creates an ever worsening housing affordability and homelessness crisis. And it is no coincidence that Black and brown communities are overrepresented among disproportionately affected, by the evictions crisis, by the epidemic of evictions, by the fact that Many of our Black and brown neighbors have been pushed out of the city because they can't cope with the skyrocketing rents. But overall, this shows how when we come together as working people across our racial differences and we build a united movement, we can win massive victories. So what have we won from the Amazon tax, which was a historic victory that we won just a few days ago, on July 6th, I believe, when the vote happened? We have won nearly $2 billion of transfer of dollars from the wealthiest corporations, not from workers, but from the billionaires, to ordinary people. And what is it going to be for? That is another victory that we have won. We not only won the Amazon tax itself, but after that, our community, through our mobilizing and organizing, we won another important vote, which was how should that money be allocated every year? We're going to tax big business every year. The city is going to have dollars from that tax. How should that be used? We demanded, led by Black clergy and other faith leaders and the Black Lives Matter activists themselves, many of whom are going to speak right now in a few minutes, we demanded that real dollars be allocated to Black community and Black and brown community affordable housing for our working class communities of color in the Central District. And we were not able to win all of the $50 million per year that we demanded because of the betrayals of the Democratic establishment. However, our movement was strong enough to win $18 million for Central District Black community housing. That is not going to be enough, but that is a huge victory, I would say, because it's a complete reversal of the racist gentrification that we have seen in the many decades. And, we had a racist redlining, and then we have an economic redlining. Economic redlining meaning that the rents are just so high that you are automatically pushed out of the neighborhoods. And by that virtue, we now have only 7% Black community in Seattle. That is just deadly consequences of unaffordable housing, not to mention those who have already been pushed into homelessness. So we have won huge victories. It is not going to be enough. At the same time, it is important for us to learn the lessons from that victory, that we won because we fought the establishment and we won because we united in the grassroots. Those are the important lessons. And so we need to take those lessons forward to win as much as we can in the People's Budget Summer 2020 campaign. And as our movement has demanded, and this is not just Seattle, nationwide, all the young community activists who have been on the front lines in the George Floyd protests are demanding that police department budgets be defunded by at least 50%. We are demanding that all the council members who have said that they support defund, which is a huge, already a huge step forward for our movement, getting that kind of commitment, but we want that commitment to turn into reality. So we don't want any delays. We don't want just promises on paper. We want real things. So what we are demanding is that next year the police budget be defunded by 50% at least, but that decision will come in the autumn budget. As I said, right now in the summer budget, we are discussing the remainder of 2020. And so what we are demanding is the police budget for the remainder of this year, the 5 months that are remaining, be defunded by at least 50%. And we've made some calculations, and that the 50% of their remaining budget comes to $85 million. So concretely, the People's Budget Summer 2020 campaign, in solidarity with Black Lives Matter, is demanding that the rest of this year's police budget be reduced by $85 million at least, and those $85 million be invested in Black and brown working class communities for jobs, for housing, and for services. We also need to be in solidarity with our homeless neighbors, and many of our homeless neighbors and activists have been some of the most stalwart activists in the People's Budget campaigns in the last 6 years that we have done them. We have won serious victories through their mobilizing and organizing. And one thing we haven't won yet is stopping the sweeps of homeless neighbors. We know they are ineffective and inhumane. There's a huge demand for that. The Black Lives Matter movement has stood in solidarity with stopping the sweeps because they are inhumane. And the city spends millions of dollars on these sweeps. We want the sweeps to be stopped and those millions of dollars be used to invest in tiny house villages, which give dignity and privacy to our homeless neighbors and a real path towards housing, or for other kinds of services, but not for harmful things like sweeps. We also want to fund renter organizing to fight against evictions. We have already made progress through the People's Budget campaign by winning real funds for the first time in our city's history, publicly funded legal assistance for those of us who are facing eviction. And that legal assistance is provided by trained attorneys from organizations like the Housing Justice Project, which do incredible work. And they're going to be speaking also in describing how their work is vital to prevent evictions, because any of us who's a renter knows once you have an eviction on your record, it is very hard to get rid of it. It follows you, it dogs you throughout your life. So preventing evictions in the first place is always important. We always had an epidemic of evictions even before the pandemic, but now with this Great Depression type of unemployment, we are going to see a tsunami of evictions once the moratoriums are lifted, unless we fight back. And so demanding real dollars for renters to organize, demanding real dollars for more eviction defense attorneys to be funded, all of this is part of that fight against eviction. And those are just the first steps. We need to keep going forward beyond this as well. And all of the work that we will do around the People's Budget will also further demonstrate the powerful unity that we can build among working people in Seattle, because we all share an interest in building Seattle that is affordable and livable for all of us. We all want a society where we have affordable housing for everyone. We want a society free of racism and sexism, and we want a society free of police violence. These reforms are the first step to make that happen. So I hope you will join us in this fight. Join us specifically at our rally on July 28th. That's a Tuesday of next week at 6 p.m. at Seattle Central College. We will join up with the Black Lives Matter activists, with homeless neighbors, with renters' rights activists and socialists, who will all come together to demand with one voice that the city's budget be a moral document that stands up for the interests of the marginalized and those who are suffering. As far as public comment is concerned, as Adam said, what you say really matters, because you inspire other working people and ordinary people who are listening. It's your chance to explain the issues. You only have 1 minute, so you have to pick and choose what you're going to say. But instead of stuffing too much into 1 minute, pick a few points you're going to make and make them well, because that's how people will be able to, listen very carefully and understand what you're saying. And also, sustained movement building matters, and that's what gets the results. But I'll tell you, even one public comment makes a difference. I'll give you a concrete example of that. On Monday, we were facing the potential of some council members, including Councilmember Mosqueda, bringing in an amendment that would take away dollars from tiny house villages, which we had just won on the Wednesday before that, Wednesday last week. And we were afraid that that would be overturned. And so many of our homeless activists mobilized and spoke up in favor of tiny house villages, because they have personal experience of how much of a life and death difference it makes for them. And it was because of those 20, 30 people speaking in public comment that this destructive amendment that would have come otherwise did not come in, because the council members felt the pressure from the movement. So that's a real example of how even one day's public comment makes a difference. So imagine how much difference building a sustained movement makes. So let's keep that in mind. Let's be inspired by what we have already won, and let's keep moving forward. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much, Shama, for that. Those really helpful words and also inspiring words. It is exciting to see how much movement there's been, on the council. We've got 7 council members who've committed to defunding the police. Mind you, the People's Budget movement has been fighting every year for defunding the police. Usually, like last year, we won $500,000 to take it out of the police, and we were able to win it for restorative justice, for the creative justice programs, for corner greeters, for community passageways. That was $500,000. It's incredible that this year, because of the George Floyd protests, because of the uprising in society, we're now talking about an $85 million defunding just this year. And then every year after, divesting by $200 million from the police and putting it towards the Black and brown community needs that have been for so long neglected, that have been ignored. Let's go ahead right now and hear from One of the activists, Teal Turner, who's been on the front lines of this defund movement and who knows very well that those promises that have been made by a council member, they're important. But anybody like Teal or like those of us, a lot of us watching who've been in the tax Amazon struggle, we know just how capable council members, the establishment, Democratic politicians are of saying one thing and then doing another. And then ultimately it is going to be the strength of our movement, just like with the Amazon tax. We won a big Amazon tax on the strength of our movement over and above the opposition of the establishment. So if we think that we've already won an $85 million defund of the police this year, or a $200 million defund of the police every year after, we got another thing coming. But luckily, we've got folks like Teal Turner who are building this movement. So let's go ahead and let's hear from Teal about this defund movement, about the needs of the community, the Black and brown community are needed, and how we're gonna win this. So go ahead and take it, Teal.
Yo, it's Adam. Whoa, wrong person. All right. As Adam said, man, look, we've been doing this, what, 50-something days now here in Seattle? And every time we get 10 steps ahead and make these bull crap promises that, oh yeah, we'll do this, we'll do that, we'll do this, we'll do that. The mayor claimed Black Lives Matter, then put out a budget that only included taking about 5% of SPD's budget. That is not showing Black Lives Matter. And that is not showing you for this movement to defund the police department. Because 5% or $20 million is not going to change their attitudes and what they're doing in this city to the people in this city. Like, Black and brown communities are being taken advantage of every single day by these officers that are supposed to protect and serve them. But it gets swept underneath the rug and it goes unnoticed because Seattle won't stand up and admit that, hey, we've done things wrong too. Well, that has ended and the city's finally waking to it. And now there is no more empty promises. We're not taking any more empty promises from council members. Mosqueda included, while she's, whatever she's over there doing. I don't care who you're buddy with. Mosqueda, you are not exempt from standing up and doing what's right. We want that whole $85 million. We don't want a piece of it. We don't want it dressed up. We don't want $5 million dressed up looking like 85 million. No, we want exactly $85 million. And that's exactly what we want. This is the movement telling you what we want. We don't want part of it. We want the whole 85 million. We're not going to dress it up. We're not going to take your promises. Strauss, we need more than a promise. Peterson, you know what to do. Juarez, you know what to do. All you guys know what to do. And the movement has shown you guys what we are going to do if you do not defund the police department by 50%. We are going to come out here every day and beat our feet to the streets. We're going to show up on June 28th at the rally and tell these people exactly what we want from them and how we're going to go about doing that. Because it's just not enough to come out here and march in the streets. You need to call your council members. You need to get on public comments and call them out personally. See, because public comments, they have nowhere to run and hide. They can hear you. You can call them out personally, individually. Accountability, hold your politicians to a higher standard. Hold them accountable for what they're doing here. Because how they show up for us determines how we show up for them when it comes time to show up for them. They have no choice. They're already backed into corners. They don't have a choice but to stand up and stand on our side and do what's right. And it's on us to make them. So July 28th, show up to the rally and let's make these people do exactly what we need them to do. It's not enough to just promise and try to pacify anymore. It's time to put up or shut up. Put your money where your mouth is. That's what you're saying. Stand behind that and actually do it. You know what I'm saying? That's really all I got, man.
All right. Well, thank you, Teal. And in reality, what we're talking about isn't rocket science here.
No.
It's simple as showing up like Sean has been talking about. But we also shouldn't understate the fact that the movement that is showing up, and the name of Sean and Tati, who we'll hear from in a moment, the name of their organization says a lot. Everyday March. You know, these are the folks who are showing up every day. But it's also incredibly important to see activists who are going out there and marching, but then also who are clear and aware that there is a budget committee by the city council that's discussing where those funds should be allocated right now. And the fact that Sean and activists in Everyday March recognize and are focusing their energies over the next 2 weeks on that council and on pressuring to say, you talk about defund, but that means concretely $85 million, and it means putting it in the Black and brown communities who have been systematically neglected. That focus is oftentimes the difference between a movement that is able, to have the establishment kind of wait it out, to delay, to make promises, but then not actually follow through with the cash, with the dollars, with the actual investments. That's the difference oftentimes between a movement that is fizzled out ultimately and that actually succeeds, like the Amazon tax victory and like what these activists are fighting for with defund. Let's go ahead and hear right now from Tati, who's together with Sean, who's also been organizing and maybe, speaking to the needs of the community, but then also, what's planned over the next week leading up to the 28th would be really good. And folks hopefully can get an opportunity to participate in some of this organizing work. So Tati, go ahead and take it from here if you're there.
There you go. Yeah.
Hey, I'm Tati. I'm one of the organizers for Everyday. The name says it all. We do this every day until, we get our demands met. We're working on the first two right now, which is getting SPD defunded by 50% and reallocating those funds to Black communities. Over the next 2 weeks, like Adam had said, we're going harder than usual because we want to make sure we're applying the right pressure to make sure these demands get met. I mean, we're always applying pressure all the time, every single day, but right now it's crucial for us to apply more pressure. We're going to be trying to get as much people on our team as we can. And like Adam and Shama said, making sure that money goes to Black communities. Also, there are Black people in these tiny homes and homeless and the working class especially. So it's also for that because that's a part of Black people. So we're just, amping up our marches, postering, getting people's emails and phone numbers so we can phone bank and get everybody on our side. But TK basically said, TK basically said, everything that we're doing, we're just pushing extra hard this week to fight for the Black community so we can maybe stop beating our feet to the streets as often as we do and get our demands met.
All right, thank you so much, Tati. It's again so critical to have the voices from the community, from the activists who are fighting on the streets as part of these prep meetings. Obviously, we're preparing right now in about 30 minutes. People have signed up and they're going to give their public comment to the city council. As we've noted, we're of course giving comment to the council. We're pressuring city council with the demands of the movement. But at the same time, we're in fact also, and more importantly, we're speaking to each other in the movement about how we can most effectively fight for our demands. And so hearing from Tati, from Sean about the organizing work that's being done is super critical. And I know we've got a link and maybe we're sharing it already in the different chats, but a link where if you click on it, then you can sign up to help Everyday March, to help those of us in our office go ahead and put posters up. We're going to be leafleting every day, starting today at 4 p.m. at Seattle Central, at the plaza at Seattle Central. We're going to be meeting up and then going out and leafleting and putting up posters and getting people to sign up to build this movement, for the people's budget, to defund the SPD, and then fight for other demands, as Shama mentioned, around stopping the sweeps, around funding tiny house villages, and funding renter organizing and fighting evictions. Today at 4 p.m., people can sign up to come to Seattle Central to help do that organizing work. And then every day after that at 3 p.m., Seattle Central, we're going to be doing the same thing, leafleting, postering, building this movement, leading up to this march on July 28th, which again, we're going to have a link for. We're going to have it, make it real easy so people can know about it, put it on their calendar, and then ultimately get the word out, share among your friends. Let's go ahead right now. We know that the Defund SPD is a huge part of this people's budget movement. It's the big demand that we're going to need a mass movement, of course, to win. And at the same time, there's other important things that our people's budget movement has fought in year after year. One of those things is funding for authorized encampments, or right now for tiny house villages. And at the same time, while we want to fund emergency solutions to the crushing homelessness problem that we see in our city, we also want to stop doing the harm that is caused when the city wastes millions of dollars by sweeping our homeless neighbors, our homeless sisters and brothers, and especially to continue doing that during the COVID-19 pandemic is especially egregious. Let's go ahead and hear from Sean Smith about the work that they're doing to fight this, and also their work in the People's Budget Movement. So Sean, can we go ahead and hear from you, please?
Thank you, Adam. I appreciate the time. Nicholsville appreciates the time. Presently, Nicholsville North Lake is under threat from the mayor's office to be swept August 1st. We've been trying to negotiate with the mayor's office for going on 6 months now to find another piece of city land in which to land this village on. However, the mayor's office has come back recently and said that the only way that that can happen is with a master services agreement, which we disagree with, as there's nothing in the ordinance that says as much. Further, we find it a little perplexing that the mayor would be so adamant about moving us during the midst of a nationwide pandemic with coronavirus on the rise across the country. It's crazy to think that this community should move in the midst of that and expose the folks here who coincidentally have been tested twice in as many months and come back negative. Of course, we're about defunding, the navigation team, especially. The navigation team does nothing but harm and lose folks into more danger by picking them up and trashing their things. It is crazy. With defunding the police, that's another $200 million a year that we could be putting towards interim solutions like tiny house villages, which keep people safe and secure. Gives them a door to lock behind them. It gives them a sense of community. These things are important to the mental health of an individual in order to be able to move on to the next phase. I don't understand how bureaucracies or elected officials can't see that or refuse to understand that. We're asking folks to speak out today on our behalf. Shama graciously has put forward a proviso that would defund any attempt at the city of sweeping us here at our present location. Other than that, we're standing in solidarity with you. We'll see you on the 28th. And thank you so much for the work that you guys do.
All right, thank you so much, Sean. And yeah, anybody who's followed our watch parties previously, knows Sean, knows Nicholsville. And in reality, it's Nicholsville has been with our office, Councilmember Shama Sawant's office, Socialist Alternative, and building this people's budget movement since the very beginning. And it was with Nicholsville that we really, one of the first major victories of the people's budget movement, which is winning first-time authorization and funding for the encampments, the homeless encampments, which had long become a de facto reality because capitalism and the free market is so woefully unable to provide affordable housing for working people, much less the poorest among us, as inequality has just shattered our city. It was with Nicholsville and through that people's budget movement that we were able to win first-time funding, and then every year after that, win additional funding. This year, we really want to win a massive amount of funding for tiny house villages, and we also want to stop the sweeps. And we know that the activism of Nicholsville and the people's budget movement is going to be key. Along with that, we know that renters are facing an incredibly precarious situation given the economic, just catastrophe that was the result of this COVID-19 crisis, and not just the COVID-19 crisis, the total failure of the for-profit healthcare system and the absolute lack of leadership institutionally, of course, on the part of the Republicans especially, and Donald Trump nationally. But we've seen the ripple effects through communities, especially of color, through poor communities. And we know that renters are going to be hit especially hard. We've got moratoria on evictions that are temporarily offsetting this. We've got certain stimuluses which have aided renters, but those are temporary. And on August 1st, I believe it's August 1st, the moratoria are set to expire. So on the one hand, our people's budget movement is calling for those moratoria to be extended. And on the other hand, we're calling through this people's budget movement for a massive increase in funding for renter organizing and also in funding for legal representation for renters facing evictions. We're lucky enough to have Caitlin Heinen from the Housing Justice Project, who's fought with the people's budget movement for this exact demand before. And we're lucky to hear from her to talk about fighting for renter rights funding and against evictions in the people's budget this year again. So take it, Caitlin. Thank you for joining us.
Yeah, thanks for having us. So where to start here? It's the umbrella kind of introductory sentence to describe what I wanted to talk about at today's public comment is that housing is inherently a racialized issue. Race will be a huge factor in the tsunami avalanche of evictions we're about to see come this fall if the eviction moratorium is allowed to expire on August 1st. So just to get a picture of that, 42% of Black households rent, 24% of Latinx households rent, this 42% of Black households in Washington are behind in rent as of June, and 24% of Latinx households in Washington are behind in rent as of June. And you compare this to only 8% of white households are behind in rent as of June. And we can expect that to increase. For example, we've been paying attention to what other states around the country are doing. In states where there's no eviction moratorium, like Arkansas, there was a 172% increase just from May to June. And with no eviction moratorium in place, you can't excuse that increase as a backlog in the courts. It rather suggests an increased need. And this will likely further increase in August and September when CARES Act benefits expire, if the eviction moratorium is allowed to expire. And right now, for Washington specifically, we're expected to hit peak unemployment numbers in September. So we've got a while before we get through all of this. And so one thing to think about is if we don't act, if we don't intervene in providing funding for eviction defense and providing funding for rental assistance programs to keep folks in their homes where they already are, who are we helping? Well, we're helping white landlords preserve their wealth. There's no other way around it. And this is exactly the systemic racism that we're fighting against. If we do not do anything, if we do not get further renter protections in place, funding for those renter protections to fight for evictions, we are helping white landlords preserve their wealth. So when there is a failure to act and provide these tenant protections in order to support small-time landlords, that's just code for exactly preserving this white wealth to the detriment of communities of color in our area. Rental assistance at present will likely be overwhelmed. For instance, Los Angeles has put $100 million into rental assistance, and in the first 48 hours, they received 150,000 applications. The folks in LA are only going to be able to process 50,000 of those by lottery. And as we saw in Arizona with their rental assistance program, it'll take months to even process a fraction of these applications. And so we have to have a solid plan in terms of getting funds where it's most needed. And that is in these rental assistance programs that have been proven to help keep folks in their homes where they are. Because what follows an eviction crisis is a homelessness crisis. And this is inherently a racialized issue, as I said, because our communities of color and specifically disproportionately Black households will be impacted if no further action is taken on the part of our government leaders to intervene. Just looking at Seattle alone, white households make up 65.7% of the population, but only 48.3% of those folks had eviction filings. Compare that to Black households. They only make up 7.1% of the population, and yet their households had 31.2% of eviction filings. And so this is an urgent issue. We are dealing with a movement that has a lot of energy, a lot of passion, and Councilmember Savant's office has been incredible in movement building and pushing the Seattle City Council to defund the police and reallocate those funds to address these very real crises that we're about to see. Thanks.
Thank you, Caitlin, and much appreciation goes to the Housing Justice Project, of course, for the incredible work that they do in providing those that representation to the renters who are otherwise left out and just forced to fend for themselves in an environment that wildly puts the power in the hands of landlords, and especially the corporate landlords, which is why, of course, the demand to cancel rents is not just limited to rents, but also canceling mortgages and utilities, because it's the small mom and pop landlords together with renters, together with struggling small business owners, and of course the Black working class homeowner who has been gentrified so viciously from the Central District. We want renters together with struggling homeowners to band together to make it so the banks pay for the costs of this coronavirus crisis, the corporate landlords and the corporate management companies. But we also know that the power that we build fighting for renter organizing funding and fighting for legal representation is part and parcel to winning that victory. Violet Lavatai from the Tenants Union was signed up to speak, but we know that she also had other commitments she wasn't sure she was going to be able to get out of. So we really appreciate how thoroughly, Caitlin, you were able to address this question, and especially how the question of evictions relates to the question of the fight for racial justice, which of course we also saw is linked to the fight for housing justice, with 20,000 primarily Black working class people signing the Tax Amazon petition to put it on the ballot in the event that the city council didn't take decisive action, which they were pressured to do so by those 20,000 signatures and by the support that the Black community offered to the Tax Amazon movement. And we know that all these people's budget fights, when we're talking about defunding, we want funding for the Black and brown community, and they're also linked to these other struggles. But of course, we can talk about where the money should go, but unless we actually build the struggle to win it, it's all just academic. And what we're here to do is build the strongest possible movement to pressure City Council. Let's go ahead and hear from Jonathan Rosenblum, a community organizer in Shama's office, who's prepared a little contribution for how we can most effectively fight to pressure City Council, and also at the same time to turn out at least 500 people to this rally on the 28th, next Tuesday. So let's go ahead and hear from Jonathan about organizing to build and fight for this people's budget, including defunding the police by at least 50%, together with other working class demands. Jonathan?
Great. Thank you, Adam, and welcome to the 100 plus people who are in this meeting right now. We are building the movement through this meeting, through the work we're going to do later today in public comment, and especially through the organizing work that we're going to do between now and Tuesday to get 500 people out on the streets. Now, we know that Teal, Sean, and Tati and others have been out every day, and we need to make sure that the numbers are amplified on Tuesday. That doesn't just happen on its own. It happens through one-on-one conversations that we have with friends, with neighbors, with coworkers in the coming days. And I'd like Nick, if you could put up our slides, that would be great, on some key talking points. Thank you, Nick. And no need to write this down. At the end of this short slideshow, we're going to give you the tiny URL that you can go to download these exact same slides. But we wrote up some key talking points that you can use as you talk to your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers about why it's important to come out on Tuesday, the 28th. As you know, we won the Amazon tax not by just negotiating with city council members. We won by building a fighting movement and through incredible multiracial solidarity that exists in our working class. That's how we won, and that's what we need to do between now and Tuesday to motivate people to turn out. We have momentum, it's true, to defund the remaining 2020 police budget by at least 50%, to stop the sweeps of homeless neighbors, and to win funds for renter organizing to fight against evictions. But let's not underestimate how difficult that's going to be. We're dealing with an entrenched political establishment, a mayor who is fighting us every step of the way, and the SPD who is going to fight for every dollar as well. So we have tremendous opposition. We need to turn people out on Tuesday. We know that corporations like Amazon have been profiting from the crisis. We're facing massive joblessness, a healthcare crisis, stunning cuts to public services, and the prospect, as we just heard earlier, of the tsunami of evictions that happens, that could happen if we don't organize and fight back. Let's go to the next slide. We are already fighting back, and especially led in part by Black and brown young activists who have really carried out a rebellion against racism and police violence in the last couple months especially, and who are demanding defunding of police departments, not just here, but nationwide, and in fact, beyond the United States. We know that it's precisely this multiracial nature of the Black Lives Matter movement that is putting pressure on the political establishments, and that's who needs to turn out on Tuesday. And we also need to remember that the tax Amazon victory was won because working class people understood that our movements are interlinked. There are no separate struggles, economic, social, racial, climate justice, etc. These are all part of the same fight against an oppressive capitalist system, and we have to unite together and fight as one. Next slide. So on the 28th, it's coming at a very crucial time because it's the day before a pivotal city council budget committee meeting where the committee, the council members, will debate and vote on a number of the amendments that our movement is putting forward with Council Member Chama Sawant to defund the police budget by at least 50% in order to build housing and fund services and youth jobs, to stop the sweeps of homeless neighbors, and to win funds for renter organizing to fight against evictions. Those discussions and votes in the council budget committee are going to happen on Wednesday, the 29th. So we need a very strong show of support on Tuesday night, the 28th, to send a message to the political establishment that our movement is coming for them. We know that winning anything is going to require a struggle. And so it's important for people to turn out Tuesday night for the rally and march. Let's go to the next slide. So if you want to use these talking points as you go out and have one-on-one conversations with your friends, your neighbors, your coworkers, please go to this web address. It's tinyurl.com/July 28 talking points. Very simple. tinyurl.com/July 28 talking points. Let's leave that up for just another moment, and so people can write it down. Now, in a moment, we're also going to give people an opportunity to engage in other ways. Let's go to that next slide now. What everybody who's on this call can do is two things. One is commit to reaching out to at least 3 friends, neighbors, or coworkers today. Don't wait until tomorrow. Call them today, knock on their door if they're an apartment neighbor, urge them to come and join us on July 28th. And then secondly, follow the link below to volunteer, to leaflet, poster, and phone bank. In the next few days, we're going to be out in the community spreading the word about the July 28th rally. The more volunteers we have, obviously, the more we can do to get the word out. So please join us. There is a form online that you can go to sign up for any of the activities that you're available for. And it is tinyurl.com/peoplesbudgetvolunteer. That's it in terms of my own presentation. Adam, can we leave this screen up while we go back to you or the next speaker?
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And I know that we've also had this link put in the chats so people can click the link and then sign up to volunteer. You know, we got about 6 minutes before we, before we put up the screen to have people go to the Seattle channel. It's also just important to remember it's not too late to sign up for public comment, and it does matter. The more people signed up, the more influence, the more impact it has. The people's or the city budget process is tailor-made to not include ordinary people. And that is the reason why we began the People's Budget movement, the first year we were in office. And in reality, the People's Budget movement was born out of the fact that before Shama was elected to City Hall, before there was a socialist in office, I'm not even kidding you, most of the council members would literally go on a taxpayer-funded retreat organized with the Chamber of Commerce. The year that we first got into office, the majority of the council went to Suncadia Resorts, and they were talking about what their priorities were. And we said, forget about that. We're going to organize a press conference and start the People's Budget movement. We did it on the steps of City Hall. And from there, we began the movement, which, as I've noted, won the first time authorization and funding for homeless encampments. We were part of the movement that successfully, together with young activists of color, blocked the bunker. And then the People's Budget movement was able to take 160, of the 160 million, we were able to take 29 million, which would have gone to the bunker and put it to affordable housing. We've also seen other victories like funding for, Caitlin from the Housing Justice Project mentioned that we're fighting for legal representation for renters facing eviction. The last 2 years, we've won partial funding, not complete funding, but partial funding for renters facing eviction. So we know that organizing our movement, that pressuring city council when they're discussing the budget can, yield, give the goods. It can yield benefits for working people. This year, however, it's worth noting that the stakes are higher, and that's because of the movement that Teal Sean and Tati represent. The Black Lives Matter movement, which has exploded in outrage, of course, of the racial injustice, the systematic violence against communities of color, which really does put on the order of the day the possibility of taking just this year $85 million away from the Seattle Police and putting it into the Black and brown community, whether it's form of restorative justice demands like creative justice that we were able to win funding for last year, or like the Corner Greeters program, which takes at-risk youth and gives them opportunities for other ways, and like the community passageways, which aims to incorporate youth of color into the political process. We want more funding for those kinds of programs. We've seen funding for communities of color to lead development, housing development programs in the Central District. So we can fight around those demands, and at the same time, we know that the $85 million or the $200 million that the establishment is not just going to give away that kind of funding, that kind of money without a massive struggle. So Teal Sean, Tati, the People's Budget Movement, we appeal, of course, in 2 minutes time, make your demands to the City Council. Please note that you're part of the People's Budget Movement. Please note, of course, that Councilmember Sawant is committed to bringing forward, laws, amendments to the budget to defund the police by $85 million, to fund renter organizing, eviction defense, to fund tiny homes villages, and of course, to stop the sweeps. But then more to the point, it's about more than just this one community meeting and this one budget committee. We've got the rally next Tuesday. There is a goal of having 500 people. If we smash that and we have even more, that speaks volumes to the City Council and will, of course, increase our ability to have more people calling in and pressuring the council the day after. And then we know that the final budget vote for this special session is happening on August 3rd. So we want to have the maximum forces available to pressure the City Council around that. And then I'll just end by saying that this is part and parcel of the big budget struggle, which has to happen in just 2 months' time, when the whole shebang is up for discussion, the $200 million that needs to be defunded from the police department in order to invest in Black and brown communities. So we're just 1 minute away from the Seattle City Council Budget Committee meeting, when we should put up the splash screen hopefully right now, so that people can go over to the Seattle channel and await a phone call from the City Council to give that public comment. But also please put on your calendars the Tuesday, July 28th rally that you see on the screen right now. And of course, join us in the streets to help build for that. Click on that link so that you can sign up for leafleting shifts, postering shifts. And thank you so much for being a part of this community meeting on behalf of Shama Sawant, Everyday March, Nicholsville, all the people who've sponsored this event, Socialist Alternative. Thank you for joining the People's Budget Struggle, and we'll see you in the streets to fight for this funding.